All right, Anthony, we're ready.
All right, your mic's up.
Welcome back to your weekly checkup. So excited to be with you tonight. We've had a little bit of a tech challenge, which is it happens, but hey, we're excited to be here. So, Dr. Amy, welcome to your weekly checkup. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'd love for our guests to hear about what it is you're working on.
Yeah, I always get excited talking about trauma, which is interesting. That's not the response that I get from most people, but there's so much that we can do. And so for me, trauma is a very solutions focused conversation. So I love talking about trauma. And I never thought that I would become a person that helped other people with trauma. I was actually headed for a conventional physician practice. I started medical school when I was 21 and got a master's in biochemistry because I'm one of those science nerds. And then my life changed. And what changed my life was just as I was finishing my master's in biochemistry, I decided to foster parent.
Mm.
Never had the intention to adopt, but when they placed Miguel with me, there was a very hard moment when I realized what his life would be if I did not get him out of the foster care system.
Sure.
So I made that decision, and that decision has changed the rest of my life, personally and professionally. And this is what I do now: is I help people address stored trauma in the body. And I am firmly believing that it takes an integrative approach. One modality will never help us actually fully get to the stored trauma in our body, and nor does talking about it and talking about the story. It changes our biology, but what happens is that then our body and our biology gets stuck in that trauma state, and we live there for most of our lives unless we know what to do.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because what do people have to do to look at it differently? Let me ask it another way. Sometimes people they'll say they um, are taking this drug and that drug and the other drug and talking to that person and doing that thing and whatever. And then there are other people who say, no, there's a different way. For whatever reason, there seems like there's a different way, and it seems to me like there's a pretty big dichotomy. I mean, I don't know that people are in both camps a whole lot, but what is it that is making people say, hey, we got to look at this differently?
I think it's understanding the science of trauma, Dr. Lazar. It's actually understanding that our body has a physiological trauma response. So there are changes that happen in our biology and our neurobiology when we go into both a stress response, and then a trauma response is when we get overwhelmed and we're unable to respond to a stress. And I think it has been traditionally thought that all of that just happened in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we need to do is just, well, we obviously need to talk about it and
Mm-hmm.
process it because that's how we get it out of our head, not realizing that, oh, like this was an actual change in my physiology. And that means that there was adrenaline that was released that never got discharged. And until that process is completed, that adrenaline continues to cause damage. And what happens is that it continues to create the perception for our nervous system that we're still in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Never got the message that whatever it was that we experienced is over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why people get stuck in either anxiety or depression and overwhelm. And it's going to change all of our biology. And so here's where the medications come into play. Because it changes our biology, changes our serotonin, changes dopamine, changes glutamate, changes brain inflammation, gut inflammation. And so then when we go to the doctor and we say, I'm feeling anxious, their response is, oh, well, I know the medication for anxiety. Here's an SSRI. Or, oh, you're having sleep problems. I've got just the medication for that. Here's a sleep medication, not realizing that there's a driver for these symptoms. And yes, those are going to be the downstream symptoms, but that's all they are. They're just the downstream symptoms. And they're truly just band aids then until we can get to the nervous system that is still stuck in danger mode.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So we talk about a lot with patients in our office, and Jaden's good with this one. It's she gets it. Is that we have to do things that are physiologically compatible with our bodies. In other words, we don't need to cover it, numb it, freeze it, burn it, remove it necessarily. I mean, hopefully not. But at least initially, I can say confidently that we don't need to start with that. And so we, an example we'll give is, hey, if we moved to Colorado, or if we met up in Colorado for a symposium in skiing, right, our red blood cell count would be different at a different altitude, and we wouldn't go see a doctor for that. That would just be a normal physiological response. And I think when we make pain the bad guy, physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, when pain is the bad guy and not the warning sign, we start to get in a lot of trouble. I think I've seen it and experienced it.
Yeah, that's the challenge, that so many people are uncomfortable with feeling uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as anything uncomfortable, and whether that's physical pain or that's emotional pain, then that's when the coping mechanisms come out, and we're doing anything to stuff it,
Right.
avoid it,
Right.
distract ourselves. And then of course we know that that just piles on the damage to our physiology. And so the solution really is, well, how can we actually take those as warning signs, like you're saying? But the first step is actually being able to be comfortable enough with actually feeling that, and then being able to stay present to it and being like, okay, what's the message here for me?
Mm-hmm.
But as you're saying, these are all normal
Mm-hmm.
physiological responses. There's nothing that the body does that's not the appropriate response.
Exactly right.
And so, emotional trauma then at a cellular level is so similar to physical trauma, where if you are jumping on a trampoline, you're putting stress on your bones, for example, but that's a stress on your bones, and that actually makes them stronger. Whereas if you go and do something that is beyond their capacity to hold, you break the bone.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing with the body: if the body has what it needs, it heals the broken bone. You don't have to go to therapy about it. You don't have to talk to the therapist. You don't have to process it. When the body has what it needs, it heals itself. It knows what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful, innately design of our physiology. And so if we experience a emotional trauma, psychological trauma, and we're not able to get over it, that means that our body hasn't had what it needed to do the healing process. Because when it has what it needs, it will heal even all of our deepest emotional wounds, just like it will heal a broken bone.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to your weekly checkup with Dr. Lazar. Jaden is in studio, and we are with Dr. Amy from Biology of Trauma. Really, really fascinating work. We're taking calls live, 866-521-WELL, 866-521-9355. Now, Jaden and I have had, initially, unfortunately, and then I think maybe as time goes on, maybe more fortunately, have been in lots of conversations about a specific trauma, and I will let her, take that as far as she wants. But what we're talking about specifically is what happens when there is physical and emotional trauma in the same event. That's kind of, that's a big one. So we want to get to that. Jaden, I'm gonna hand it off to you. And, to the extent that you're comfortable sharing, I know you've been super brave about stuff, and we're super proud, but this is something that is super important. And Dr. Amy, we couldn't be more honored to, be sharing any of this. Jaden hasn't shared any of her story publicly, and we couldn't be more honored to be doing that with you, talking about the work you do in the biology of trauma. And we're going to tell people how they can work with you as well. And so before we get into anything, I don't know how detailed it will be, but if you're listening or watching online, I want you to know that the content we're going to talk about is is can be very triggering. And so, we're going to give you a second if you want to switch or turn off or clear the room or whatever. We want to make sure that we're honoring the people that are listening. So anyway, so Jaden, with why don't you share, to the extent you're comfortable, what it is that you're working through?
Thank you for having me. I was really excited actually for this topic because, oh my goodness, it's been a little over a year now already.
Mm-hmm.
I was involved in karate for 13 years, and I had my second degree black belt, and I was so excited because I was having fun, I was staying in shape, I was involved in a community, and I was preparing to learn how to defend myself if ever needed. And just last year, I was raped by my karate teacher, and that was both physical and emotional trauma. Like, just the amount of emotions and pain that came with that, and that I'm still working through, is very heavy and difficult to deal with. I have been getting adjusted minimum once a week since then, and before then, but specifically once a week, because my body was no longer holding adjustments. There was no fight or flight. Like, I was still in
Freeze.
Freeze. That's a good way to put it.
Yep.
And my body, even still to this day, I'm very jumpy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very hesitant. I'm not alone ever. And it made me, the ironic thing to me was that the person who taught me everything I knew about how to defend myself was the one person I couldn't defend myself against.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when I heard we were doing this topic, I was really excited because I wanted to share that you can get through anything and it's okay. I was scared to talk about it. I didn't know what would happen to me or if he knew that I was talking about it. And my parents have been here. My grandparents have been here. My friends are still my friends. They're here for me. They listen to me. And it's a different stage of life now for me. But I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm super proud of you. That's really cool. Thank you for being so brave, and your story is still being written, which is really, really cool. So, Dr. Amy, we our big question with all this is, what do we do when it's physical and emotional and trust is, like, all the things, right? Like, those are the things. What does our body need at that point? What do we need to do? What helps us be our best, either in spite or because of this, whatever this is to people listening,
Yeah. And as we look at what makes a trauma, there are 3 qualities of an event or an experience that will make it a trauma. And that is that it is overwhelming. It's overwhelming, meaning in the moment we can't process what's happening. And in that sense, the other quality is that it's unbelievable.
Mm.
Never saw this coming.
Mm-hmm.
Never thought or imagined that this could happen.
Hmm.
So there's that overwhelming, but in an unbelievable type of way. And that is what brings the shock.
Mm-hmm.
Is there's usually a shock to that initial freeze moment where it's like, I can't believe this is happening. Cannot believe this is happening. And I wasn't prepared for it. And I don't know what to do. And that's why it overwhelms us and we don't do anything and we freeze. But then there's this third quality, and that is that it is unbearable. And when something is unbearable, that just means that it creates within us in that moment physical sensations that we would normally just say are feelings and emotions. All feelings and emotions are a physical sensation in our body. That's how we know if we feel happy. For example, our chest feels open when we're happy. That's how we know that we feel happy. We don't normally associate that because we're not normally that connected with our body, but all emotions, anger, fear, sadness, joy, they're all produced by physical sensations in our body. And when that physical sensation in our body becomes unbearable, what we do, and I want to say what we do, what our brain does, what our nervous system does for us, is it dissociates. And dissociation is always a part of a trauma response in our body because it's so unbearable to feel what we're feeling in that moment. And when we can't escape, it's our way to escape. It's our way to escape mentally. It's our way to escape emotionally, so that the intensity of that awfulness that we're feeling is just bearable enough, so that it allows us to get through something that we never imagined that we would be able to get through. And that's how we get into the trauma response. But now our job is to get out. And that's what most people miss. And that's what most people have no idea what to do. And that's why they get stuck in that place, which when we get stuck, that's when we have all of these elements of the trauma response. We stay hypervigilant. We startle easily. We still feel numbed out sometimes. We can still find ourselves zoning out and checking out because all of these elements of that trauma response stay wired into our nervous system. And so how to get out of that, I'm going to tell you with one word. We've got to complete. It never completed that trauma response. And there's 3 things that the body needs to complete a trauma response. 3 things. And to share those 3 things, I'm going to share an analogy with you of a kid on a playground. And there's a high slide, and he's climbed up all of those rings in order to stand at the top of the slide. He's so excited. He's small, 3 years old, 4 years old. His mom is there sitting on the bench watching him. All is good. All is good. And then he slips. And as he's falling, he has that overwhelming, unbelievable, and unbearable fear of what is happening. And so his body goes into the trauma response because of those 3 qualities. He hits the ground. And so there's that additional element of the physical trauma, not just emotional, but physical trauma. And in this story, we'll say that he didn't break anything, but he lays there still stunned. And you lay there in a daze. And sometimes that's what people can remember that they were like in that moment of their trauma, is it feels very foggy. It feels very cloudy. And like I was just in a daze and I just went through the motions. I really didn't understand what was happening. Some people have such a strong dissociation that they have like an out of body experience, and it's almost like they're outside of themselves watching what's happening to them. But that's a very strong form of dissociation. Most people just have that degree of everything feels like it's just in a daze. And so this kid, he's laying on the playground and he's so in a daze that he's not even crying. He's just laying there. Now, of course, the mother comes rushing over, right? Oh my goodness, she's panicking as most mothers would do. What he needs is a very specific thing. And most people pick him up, or they, get him up to make sure that he's okay. And that's actually the worst thing that we can do, because his body doesn't have what it needs to complete that trauma response. And when we disrupt that, then that's when his body would stay in that, I still feel like I'm free falling. Still feel like I'm free falling. And life then starts to feel overwhelming, unbelievable, and unbearable. Life, because the danger still feels like it's present. So what he needs, and what every human body needs in order to come out of that experience of overwhelming, unbelievable, and unbearable, are three things. One is a sense of safety. A sense of safety. And we can't rush that. So that's why the other thing that the body needs is time. He just needs to lay there until his body catches up with what happened. And if we don't disrupt, what will happen naturally is that he will start to turn his head and orient to his environment as his body starts to come out. And he is naturally doing that. I'm seeking safety. Am I okay? Or am I still falling? Am I okay? And we first usually orient to our environment, and then we orient to ourselves, and we touch our body. Did I break anything? I remember when I was mountain biking a lot, had some big falls. And that's what I would do, is I would start to wake up from this daze that I was in. All right, did I break anything? No, okay, I'm okay. And we get to that place where, because we've now had that time and the ability to have the space to just let our body catch up with what happened, then our body gets the message, I'm safe now. Oh, that was hard, but it's over. It's in the past. If it doesn't have that time, then it never records it as a memory of the past. And we need our brain to be able to put it in our hippocampus and say, that was in the past. That was hard. That was horrible. And it's in the past. What happens is that it doesn't get stored as a memory of the past, and it remains our present danger.
Okay.
And so the third thing that our body needs to come out of the trauma response is energy. And this is where the biology piece becomes really important. If we have any type of mitochondrial compromise, if we have nutrient deficiencies, if we have inflammation, it will be harder for our body to get that message of, okay, it's safe to come out of the shutdown. It will look around and be like, no, we still don't have energy. We still don't have, ATP as our energy in our body. We still don't have enough of that. Oh, no, we still don't have enough of magnesium. So we're still at danger. And even though it's not the emotional danger, it's an inner danger. And so it still communicates danger. And the body needs energy to do that orienting and that processing and taking in my environment, to really know that I'm safe now, and that is over. If we don't have the energy, the body's just like, no, like I'm just going to lay here, and I'm not going to be able to have the energy to come out of this dark, bad place.
So when we're dealing with that, or healing from that, or processing through that, so the story you told is very relatable, Dr. Amy, and but what if it's not an incident where it's falling off, and now the danger is gone? Like, what if there's a continued threat, or in a very real sense, what if you have to keep, like in Jaden's situation, having to keep sharing her story over and over and over and over, not her story, sharing the details of what happened in hopes that justice would be served. And then it's ongoing and disappointment after disappointment after, right? And so, and I don't mean to be like belaboring it. What then? What then if we're still laying on that playground floor and the slide is falling on top of us and it's storming and a tornado's coming and we can't get up?
I'm not sure you're going to like my answer, but I'm going to tell you my answer anyway. And our system, our social system, our justice system, our medical system is not set up for healing. It's actually set up to continue to traumatize us.
I couldn't agree more.
And that happens through the retelling of our story. Every time we retell our story, our body is back in that place. And so what happens is that no longer is it just that one event. Now it's been that event and every single time I've retold my story, because every time I feel all of that again. I feel overwhelmed. I feel it's unbelievable and it's unbearable. I feel that. And every time we feel that, that is our body literally going into a trauma response right then. And so it actually compounds the problem over time. And so now what would have just been one event, now how many times have we told our story? Now it is a mountain to our nervous system. And so I wish that the science would get into our justice system. And I know that some people are working on it.
We wish that, don't we?
I know.
Yes.
I just came back from speaking at a trauma conference in Ireland, of all places. And one of the girls who spoke there had a similar story. And she was able to work with the justice system to do something very different because of how traumatizing it was for her. Now, she is a therapist. She's a somatic therapist, in fact. And so when she started to notice her body going into a big trauma response right there in the courtroom, she was like, no, I will not do this to myself. So she felt empowered to be able to do that because of her knowledge of what was happening in her body. But eventually, and I do mean eventually, she was able to create a very different outcome where justice was served, and she was served in a very different way than what the traditional approach has been. But this is the problem. And being on the physician side of things, I worked in the ER for years, all throughout my general surgery residency. And this is what I contributed to. Girls come in, they've just been raped, and what do? I'm supposed to take their history. I'm supposed to do this stuff. And in the process, I actually contributed to their re-traumatization rather than the healing opportunity that I could have used if I had known this science and what people actually need. I remember one girl that she came into the ER, and she was around 19 or 20 years old. And she had dark black hair. She was beautiful. And she's laying in the ER bed. And I come in. I'm on vascular surgery rotation at the time. And so the ER department had called me. I'm the resident on vascular surgery at the time. And she had a knife in her forearm. Between her elbow and her wrist, she had a knife stuck in her arm. And yet she was just laying there as if nothing. And I asked her, what happened? I mean, I don't know how you ask someone that, right? Like how do you ask this stuff? And in the most nonchalant way, she says, I don't know. I was walking from the living room to the kitchen, and when I got into the kitchen, there was a knife in my arm. And I'm like, I don't understand. I do not understand. But she was so disconnected and still so much in that daze of a trauma response that her boyfriend had stabbed her in the arm as she was walking between the living room and the kitchen. And yet she didn't feel the pain. She didn't remember. And my healing moment could have been right there to sit with her. Just sit, just be present and give her body the time that it needed to finally come out of that fog and be able to look around and see that she's not in the house anymore. Her boyfriend is not right there. And we're going to need to do surgery. We need to go take that knife out of her arm. But without knowing any of this, I just did what all the other healthcare practitioners and the social system and the justice system do. We just get the story. And we don't value time. When I think about some of the the tribes, the native tribes, a lot of what they do in Africa, where when something traumatic happens, they come together and there is a dedicated time to grieve someone's passing or process something that happened, and they do it as a group, but they actually dedicate time to this. We don't do that in North America.
Sure.
We just jump back into our life. We've got school, we've got work, we've got responsibilities. We don't have time. That's the last thing that we have. And we don't